All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to continue with your introduction to East Asia. And we kind of need to do this before we jump into popular culture. You kind of need to know about the area that we're going to be talking about. So, East Asia, um, Americans are pretty bad at history and geography, so I feel like it's something we need to go over. And to illustrate how bad we are at geography, I had a student, I think my first semester I taught this class. He walked up to me and he's like, "Josh, I'm a Japanese genius. I know everything about Japan." So, I just happen to have a blank map. I mean, a map with, the countries not labeled on it. And so I said, can you point out Japan to me on the map? He's like, "Sure, Josh, no problem. Easy. Piece of cake." So he walks over to the map, um, and he points at the Philippines, which is not a bad guess. I mean, they're both chains of islands. He just went a little too far south. But yeah, I think the rest of the world is a lot better than we are, so it's worth going over. So let's get started. Um, Hold on here. All right, so East Asia, we talked about this last time, but you have South Korea, the capital is going to be Seoul. Japan, everybody knows Tokyo. China, Beijing. North Korea, technically a part of East Asia. Who knows, maybe in the future we might see North Korean pop or North Korean drums. I'm sure they have them, it's probably just not that great right now. But Pyongyang, Taiwan, Taipei, and then Hong Kong, not really country, but for our purposes, it is different and separate from China, so we have it there. So here's a map. This not the same map that I from the story I just told you, but go ahead and take about, I don't know, 30 seconds. See if you can figure out which country's which. Some of them are pretty obvious, especially if you're from one of these countries. But if you're not familiar with Asia, you might have a little bit of difficulty. I did have one student place China in Russia before, so you never know. But give it your best shot. There's six here, the six that we just talked about. Um, Maybe write it down. Um, I don't think I have the answers on here, but to give you a hint, Um, two of them are going to be next to each other, possibly north and possibly south. To give you another hint, actually, I'll tell you this later. But okay, that should be enough time. I don't know if that was 30 seconds, but that should be enough time. If you haven't figured it out by now, that means you don't know. So we're going to start with number one, the big blob in the middle of Asia. It does not take a genius to know that this is China. And part of China down there, and if you can look past the six, there's actually a small port area, like a body of water that goes inland. That is Hong Kong. And then on the side here, this island, you have Taiwan. Number three, the long chain of islands, Japan. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you have North Korea at number two and South Korea at four there. And so yeah, that's the geography there. So the characteristics of East Asian countries, they're very different from Western countries, Western countries, right? They have a long history relative to the United States. So I'm going to be comparing these to the United States. In a lot of cases, the United States is just kind of strange, but yeah, they have a long history, thousands of years. The U.S., we've got, a few hundred on us. So a small habitable land relative to the U.S. So if you look at North Korea, South Korea, Japan, pretty small habitable land, especially Japan, it's like 70% mountains. So China is the only exception, although China has a lot of mountains and deserts, so not a lot of that land is habitable, but they do have more land than the other East Asian countries. And with that, you get generally high population density in the cities. And Japan and South Korea both have a good amount of cities, but yet for some reason people just seem to congregate in Tokyo or Seoul. To this day, I still don't know why they don't really go to the other countries. I think it has a lot to do with just the status and businesses developing in those cities. So, shame and honor-based society and culture. So, if you didn't know, here in the United States, we're considered to be a guilt-based culture, which means that what prevents you from doing bad things is your own conscience. Um, that is, that once you do something bad, you feel guilty enough to admit that you did something wrong, or that you feel guilty enough about thinking about doing something bad that you never do it in the first place. But in East Asia, it's a little different. Shame and honor based societies, usually what prevents people from doing bad things is the fact that it will hurt their reputation in society. And your reputation, as you will find out in this class, is very important, not just to the individual, but to pop stars. And you'll see that many people have had their reputations, their careers destroyed because of their reputation. So there you go. Little presence of Western religion, except for South Korea. For some reason, I don't know if you've seen, I forgot what that movie was called, Jump 22 Streeter. I don't remember, but Korean Jesus. So, yeah, Western religion is pretty well embraced in South Korea, but I had a fellow graduate student friend who would go and smuggle Bibles into China in the summer. So, yeah, I'm not saying that Western religion is something that they need to have. I'm just saying that that is one of the reasons for some of the differences that you will see between East Asian countries and the United States. And then large global economies. They're all pretty large. Even, for a while, China was the exception. I guess North Korea. It's hard to say, but now they're all pretty much large global economies. So that's going to shape, these characteristics are going to shape society, shape popular culture. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're thinking about this and your paper topic. So we need to look at major modern conflicts in East Asia. And so a lot of this is going to revolve around the Japanese Empire. Um, Japan was one of the most westernized countries in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And so it kind of saw itself as it's almost a type of manifest destiny. They saw it as their responsibility to liberate the rest of Asia from the evil claws of the Western nations. And a lot of East Asian countries had been colonized at this time, or at least had been under the influence of Western empires. So Taiwan is going to be Japan's first colony. It's going to be the model colony. So imagine this, it's after New Year's, you go out and you decide you want to lose weight, and you go get a gym pass, and you go to the gym religiously for the first month of January. It's packed because everybody else is doing the same. That's pretty much how it is for Taiwan was for Japan. There's like, yes, we're going to get this empire started on the right foot. We're going to have everything go really well in Taiwan, and they did. They built up infrastructure. They helped the Taiwanese develop a lot of things. Life got a lot better in Taiwan when the Japanese arrived, and you see that reflected today. A lot of people in Taiwan love Japan. You see a lot of Japanese goods. A lot of Taiwanese people to this day still speak Japanese. They very much embrace Japanese culture in Taiwan, so they had a positive experience. And imagine back to the analogy, the metaphor, I suppose, of going back with a New Year's resolution, going to the gym. Now, let's say we're now in June, and you're tired of going to the gym. You've got better things to do. That's how Japan felt when they got to South Korea. And so resources were running thin, patience also running thin. The soldiers were tired, they were frustrated, and so they did a lot of bad things in South Korea that they still deny to this day. One of those being comfort women. They took women from South Korea, but we'll talk about each of these individually, I think, in the following slides. So, Let's move on. Comfort women. So prostitution in Japan was is open and available during the war period. Informally, it is still that way, but I didn't tell you that. Comfort women, Korean provide, that provided to prevent STIs and rape problems. So they wanted to control who the Japanese soldiers were sleeping with so that you wouldn't have widespread STIs. This just was a problem they wanted to avoid. So the first volunteers were actually Japanese. They recruited from Japan. Obviously, it wasn't enough. There aren't enough people who would actually volunteer to satisfy all of the Japanese soldiers, and so later volunteers again were taken from Japan's colonies. And some people, some scholars will go as far as to say this meant to symbolically castrate other men. To take control of another country's women is to, I guess, yeah, essentially castrate the men. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that statement, but I could see where they're coming from with that. They estimated that about 200,000 to 300,000 women were involved in the Comfort Woman women's service. That's a lot of women engaging in something that I'm sure they don't want to be a part of. And I think the South Korean film recently, The Spirit's Homecoming, that was back in 2016, finally telling the South Korean side of the story. And that is one of the reasons why popular culture is so powerful. It gives you a voice, it gives you agency. And until you have that voice, until you have that agency, you are represented by people who do have that power. So check that out if you ever do get the chance, or if you're interested in this topic, definitely give it a look. Theft of Korean artifacts. Japan just stole stuff from Korea. They estimate it to be about 14,000 artifacts. Some of them were taken by Japan, some of them were taken by the US. They did try to return some of them. They tried to return some books back in 2011, but this is still an ongoing reason for the animosity between Japan and Korea. So it's a nice turtle, though. Forced labor. Yeah. So during the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Pacific War, the Japanese military used civilians and prisoners of war for large scale projects, um, which seems like a really good idea if you really don't care about the people that you've just colonized. One of the projects they worked on, the Burma Railway, was a railway I think that went between Thailand and Burma. They estimated about 10,000 people died during its construction. And also, an estimated 10 million Chinese people were conscripted into forced labor, and you get about 670,000 Korean civilians forced into labor as well. And the death rates for this were pretty high, high enough to where you could, if you flipped a quarter enough times, you could probably predict your own death. In Java, I think it was the worst. There was an estimated 80% death rate for people who ended up part of this forced labor system. That's pretty bad. Imagine being in a room of five people and knowing that only one of you are going to get out alive. That's pretty scary. And then, of course, the Allied prisoners of war, about 25% of them died in labor camps. And the people responsible for this were tried for war crimes, and I'm not sure if they were executed, but so here's another big issue. This body of water, this very useless, at least in my opinion, body of water, the naming of this has been fought over for a really long time. If you look in history books, American history books, the name is going to vary. Most often, you'll probably see Sea of Japan, or you might see East China Sea. You'll never see it related to Korea or South Korea, which is kind of sad. You know, they're right there and they have just as much of a claim to it than anybody else. But let's see. There've been a huge list of Sea of China, East Sea, Sea of Korea, Sea of Japan, Oriental Sea. If you did not know, Oriental is not a nice word. It's a word that just kind of lumps everybody together, everyone that is not from the quote unquote West. Um, I don't think people like that. Um, some compromise names, the Sea of Peace or the Sea of Friendship. I kind of like those. There isn't much friendship going on in East Asia, so maybe that would get them started on the right foot there. But yeah, definitely another source of animosity between the countries of East Asia. So the boycott of goods in Asia. So just based on the fact that they don't like each other, and a lot of this is over the disputes that we talked about, historical disputes, current disputes, that in several countries they've boycotted the products. So in China, you've got this sign of no Sony, no Suzuki, and Japan makes a lot of the products that make their way make it over to China. But very a lot of patriotism going on here that the people are actively boycotting products. Do you think that you would be able to boycott products from a certain country? Let's say we went to war with Japan. Could you stop buying anime related products or Japanese electronics? Could you stop buying video games? All for your country. I don't think a lot of people would be able to, but East Asia, they are pretty active and stick together when it comes to this kind of thing. So it's fairly interesting. Japanese culture origin. This one is a kind of a little far-fetched, but researchers have pointed out similarities between Japanese language and Korean language. And if you speak either, you know that they're almost grammatically identical. Some other things, the sculptures that embody Japaneseness, the Koryuji sculptures, and Korean sculptures, some people would go as far as to say that these were actually carved in Korea and they actually resemble each other quite a bit. And then the Japan restricted access to ancient keyhole tomes. They have let people go in, but restricted access was originally thought to be to prevent people from finding out that there is actually a connection between Japan and South Korea. And realistically, no, people didn't just spontaneously pop up on the island, despite what the myths may say. So they had to come from somewhere. But this is another thing that causes conflict in the area. China, you have the Nanking Massacre. So back during this time, during the Japanese colonial period, Nanking was the capital of China during the Second Sino-Japanese War. When the Japanese army was approaching, it was abandoned by the nationalist government, but the citizens were not evacuated. They were ordered to stay. Uh, I'm sure you can imagine that a lot of people left anyway. The government wasn't really there to enforce it anyway, just kind of a small auxiliary army there to keep the Japanese occupied. But over 6 weeks, they estimate that 40,000 to 300,000 unarmed individuals, including civilians, were killed. Not only that, there were killing contests. How many heads could you cut off in this amount of time? There was women were raped. There was looting of all the buildings in the capital. Buildings were set on fire. It really does show the frustration of the Japanese army at this time. So, I mean, that not to make any excuses. Both the Chinese government and the Japanese army kind of had a role to play in this whole tragedy here. But during periods of war, I guess that there still are rules that need to be followed. But it kind of seems like I'm painting Japan out to be the bad guy, but that's kind of what happens when you lose. You know, the victor writes history. So. Other minor conflicts in East Asia, uninhabited island disputes. So China and Japan over the Senkaku Islands. Why do they care about these islands that are actually sinking into the ocean due to rising sea levels? They care because of the amount of islands you have are going to dictate your sea territory, and your sea territory will give you access to probably to some gasoline and most importantly, fish. I think that's what people care about the most in East Asia when it comes to sea territory is just the right to fish in these areas. You also have Japan and Korea with a similar dispute with Takeshima and Dokudo for similar reasons. So that's what it looks like. I think Korea actually has people living on this island, and I'm pretty sure that they're living a very minimalistic lifestyle. I think there's a dock. There might be a helipad somewhere for a helicopter to land. But They actually have people living on this island to legitimize their claim to it. So yeah, the people are going to the extreme, and there's actually islands that are pretty much gone, it just disappeared into the ocean that Japan has tried to preserve. It just looks like a little rock sticking out, surrounded by concrete and metal, just so they can claim all the sea in between it. So it's very interesting. Now that China's gotten back into the dispute, things have kind of gotten a little worse in the area. But South Korea recently, the deployment of THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile defense. There's, yes, too many defenses there. But this system deployed, given to South, not given, I don't think it was given, but that they received from the United States, China perceived it as a threat to just the peace of the region. So China's response, they weren't really that excited about this, but the South Korea did it to kind of as a response to the North Korean missile launches that have been going on recently. China's response was canceled tour groups to South Korea. So there's a lot of Chinese tourism to South Korea, more often than not for cosmetic surgery. There were a drop in the K-pop concert permits. So K-pop stars need permits to work and do concerts in China. Um, some K-pop stars were cut out of Chinese dramas. I remember one of my favorites. I don't exactly remember the title, but they ended up replacing the Korean actor Rain with a different actor. I'm not sure if it was because of this or maybe it was because of a different reason, but yeah, some Korean stars were pulled from Chinese television because of this whole issue. Boycotts of South Korean products and businesses, and then, of course, the ban of South Korean entertainers from being on Chinese television. And support, they just did a survey, and they didn't survey too many people, but 280,000 is nothing to sneeze at. 86% of people supported the ban on Korean entertainers, which is, I don't think you'd get that kind of support here in the United States. So, very interesting. So, what I want to leave you with, the question today, I know I said I wouldn't have these be longer than 15 minutes. I'm already 7 minutes over. But we have these conflicts, island disputes, nationalism, war crimes. Do you think this affects the consumption of popular culture of other East Asian countries? So, do you think that people in Japan, because of these conflicts, are less likely to buy Korean products or buy Chinese products or to watch Chinese programs or to watch South Korean programs or listen to the music? Do you think this matters, or do people just do whatever they want, regardless of all of the animosity that goes on between the countries? So just keep that in mind, and I'll see you in the next lecture.